The last meal you choose to share says more about who you are than the fortune you hope to keep. Rain had a way of making every city look honest. It washed the polished glass towers and the cracked sidewalks with the same cold water, blurring the distance between people who believed they owned the world and those who were only trying to survive another night. On the edge of Baltimore's Harbor District, beneath the dim shelter of an abandoned bus stop, a woman wrapped in a faded gray coat sat with her arms folded tightly across her chest. Her shoes were soaked, her hair clung to her face, and every person who hurried past found a reason not to look directly at her. Some lowered their eyes. Others glanced for barely a second before pretending their phones demanded immediate attention. A security guard from an upscale boutique stepped outside, frowned at her, and spoke with the practiced politeness reserved for people considered inconvenient. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to move along. You're making customers uncomfortable." She looked up slowly but said nothing. She simply nodded, gathered the small canvas bag resting beside her, and stepped back into the rain. The guard watched until she disappeared from the store entrance before returning inside, satisfied that order had been restored. What he never realized was that the woman he had just dismissed owned the investment group that controlled nearly every building on that block. Evelyn Whitmore had spent 23 years building an empire worth billions of dollars. Tonight, none of it could buy her a place to sit. 50 feet away, Daniel Brooks pulled the hood of his worn jacket farther over his head as the wind picked up. His 8-year-old daughter Lily skipped carefully around puddles while hugging a paper bag against her chest as though it contained treasure. In a way, it did. Inside rested a single chicken pot pie wrapped in foil, still slightly warm despite the weather. It had been the last one left at Walter's diner before the kitchen closed for good. Walter had pressed it into Daniel's hands after his shift ended with a quiet smile and only 4 words. Grace would have wanted this. Daniel had thanked him without trusting himself to say anything else. Grace had been gone for 3 years, but every Sunday she used to bake the same recipe, insisting that comfort could fit inside a pie tin if enough love went into it. Lily still called it Mom's Sunday pie. They had planned to split it when they got home. Daniel's stomach had been empty since breakfast, but he never counted hunger the way adults usually did. As long as Lily smiled while eating, he considered himself full enough. They reached the bus shelter just as another gust of cold rain swept across the sidewalk. Lily noticed the woman before Daniel did. "Daddy," she whispered, tugging gently on his sleeve. "She's shivering." Daniel followed her eyes. Evelyn sat quietly on the far bench now, trying unsuccessfully to warm her hands with her own breath. She wasn't asking anyone for help. She wasn't holding out a cup. She simply looked exhausted in the particular way people did after discovering the world had stopped noticing them. Daniel stood still for a moment. His fingers tightened around the warm paper bag. He knew exactly how much food waited inside. He also knew there wasn't another dinner waiting in his apartment refrigerator. Lily looked up at him without saying another word. She didn't need to. Grace had once told him that children rarely learned kindness from speeches. They learned it from watching what their parents did when helping someone actually cost them something. Daniel exhaled slowly, walked across the shelter, and sat down one seat away from the stranger. Without introducing himself, he opened the paper bag, carefully unwrapped the foil, and divided the pie into 3 uneven pieces. The largest went onto Lily's napkin. The second largest he gently placed in front of the woman. The smallest remained in his own hand. Evelyn stared at the food in disbelief before looking back at the tired father beside her. "You don't even know me," she said quietly. Daniel smiled with the calm weariness of someone who had stopped expecting life to be fair a long time ago. "No," he answered. "I only know nobody should have to eat alone." Lily scooted a little closer and offered the woman a plastic fork. With both hands, Evelyn accepted it almost automatically. As she lifted the warm pie toward her face, a faint line written in faded blue marker caught her eye on the inside of the foil wrapper. "Grace's Sunday pie. For the days we need to remember home." Something inside Evelyn, something years of board meetings, luxury penthouses, and endless success had quietly buried, shifted for the very first time that day. 8 hours earlier the city looked completely different. The rain had not yet arrived. The harbor reflected a bright autumn sky, and the top-floor boardroom of Whitmore Urban Holdings overlooked Baltimore like a place where every decision felt comfortably distant from the streets below. Evelyn Whitmore stood at the end of the polished conference table while 12 executives reviewed presentation slides filled with charts, projected earnings, and colorful maps of neighborhoods marked for redevelopment. The room smelled faintly of fresh coffee and expensive leather, but none of those familiar comforts managed to quiet the uneasiness she had carried into work that morning. Richard Hale adjusted his glasses and clicked to the next slide. A digital rendering of Harbor East Renewal appeared across the massive screen. Luxury apartments overlooked the water. Tree-lined walkways connected upscale restaurants, boutique hotels, and designer stores. Investors smiled from carefully staged promotional images. It looked beautiful, at least from 30 floors above the ground. Our analysts estimate a 28% increase in long-term property value, Richard said confidently. The remaining residential buildings represent underperforming assets. Once relocation is completed, construction can begin before spring. Evelyn studied the highlighted streets without saying anything. How many families are still living there? She finally asked. Richard glanced down at his notes. 314 occupied units, although occupancy numbers continue to decline. The transition package exceeds legal requirements. Another executive leaned forward. Most residents will eventually benefit from the area's revitalization. Temporary discomfort creates permanent economic growth. Several people around the table nodded. Evelyn did not. She noticed the language more than the numbers. Transition, assets, occupancy, economic growth. Not one person had used the word people. Before she could respond, another board member smiled politely. The public relations campaign is already prepared. We will announce additional charitable donations for housing assistance during the launch event. The media will appreciate the balance between development and compassion. Richard added, generosity photographs well. A few quiet laughs circled the room. Evelyn looked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows instead. Her late father had built Whitmore Urban Holdings with a very different philosophy. He often said that a city could forgive bad architecture faster than it could forgive forgotten neighbors. After the meeting concluded, the executives filed out discussing stock prices, investment forecasts, and dinner reservations. Evelyn remained behind. Marissa Cole stepped inside carrying a slim leather folder. She had worked beside Evelyn for nearly 11 years and recognized the silence that meant something deeper than business calculations. Without speaking, she placed the folder on the table. Inside rested a yellowed handwritten letter folded carefully along worn creases. Evelyn had carried it for years without opening it. Today she unfolded it slowly. Her father's handwriting appeared exactly as she remembered. If you ever wonder whether people see you or only your success, leave your name behind for one ordinary day. Walk through your own city with nothing that announces who you are. Do not ask what strangers owe you. Ask what you owe the strangers your decisions will never allow you to meet. Evelyn read the final sentence twice before quietly closing her eyes. Marissa waited patiently. You were thinking about doing it, she said. Evelyn nodded once. Everyone in that room believes kindness is just another marketing expense. Maybe they are right. Marissa shook her head. Or maybe you are about to discover something you cannot ignore. Within an hour, Evelyn had changed into inexpensive clothes purchased weeks earlier for an experiment she had never expected to attempt. She removed every piece of jewelry except the simple wedding band that had belonged to her mother. Her phone, credit cards, driver license, and security detail remained locked inside her office safe. Marissa stitched a discreet tracking device into the inside seam of Evelyn's old gray coat just in case something went wrong. The moment you want out, call me from any public telephone, Marissa said. Evelyn smiled softly. The point is to see what happens when I cannot call anyone. She walked out of the corporate headquarters through a side entrance that no reporters ever watched. No limousine followed. No security team waited nearby. For the first time in more than 2 decades, she crossed a downtown sidewalk with no one recognizing her face. She expected freedom. She expected anonymity. She even expected discomfort. What she did not expect was how quickly the world would begin treating her as though she had disappeared. While Evelyn disappeared into a city that no longer recognized her, another morning began only 6 miles away inside a brick apartment building that had long ago stopped appearing in real estate brochures. At 5:30 in the morning, Daniel Brooks quietly silenced his alarm before it could ring twice. He remained still for a moment, listening. The old radiator clicked softly against the wall, A delivery truck rumbled somewhere outside, and from the small bedroom at the end of the hallway came the steady breathing of Lily, still asleep. Those sounds told him everything was all right for another day. He slipped from the worn couch that had become his bed since Grace passed away and folded the blanket with the same care she used to insist upon. The apartment was modest, barely large enough for two people, but every shelf held reminders that someone had once filled it with love instead of expensive furniture. A framed photograph showed Grace laughing with flour on her face while Lily, only 4 years old then, proudly held a rolling pin almost as long as her arm. Daniel smiled at the picture before quietly beginning the morning routine they had never abandoned. Pancakes were no longer possible every Saturday, because groceries had become more expensive than memories, but he still shaped Lily's scrambled eggs into a tiny heart whenever he could. By 6:15, the smell of toast drifted through the apartment. Lily wandered into the kitchen rubbing her eyes and carrying the small metal tin she never left behind. Daniel poured her a glass of orange juice and smiled. "Did you sleep well?" Lily nodded. "I dreamed Mom was teaching me how to bake again." Daniel swallowed before answering. "I think she would be proud that you still remember every recipe." Lily opened the little tin and slipped another folded note inside before closing the lid. Daniel had started the tradition after Grace died. Whenever something good happened, no matter how small, they wrote it on a scrap of paper and placed it inside the box. On difficult days, they opened it together to remind themselves that hope could survive almost anything. Daniel noticed today's note, but did not ask what it said. Some memories belonged to Lily alone until she was ready to share them. After breakfast, he braided her hair carefully. His fingers were slower than Grace's had been, but years of practice had turned clumsy attempts into neat rows that made Lily grin every school morning. "You are getting better," she said proudly. Daniel laughed. "I finally have an honest teacher." As Lily packed her backpack, Daniel reached for the stack of unopened mail resting on the counter. Hidden between utility bills was an official envelope he recognized immediately. He glanced toward the hallway to make sure Lily could not see before quietly sliding the notice behind an old cookbook. The words "final notice" and "past due rent" had become painfully familiar over the past 2 months. He would find a way. He always did. They walked 3 blocks together before reaching Lily's elementary school. She hugged him tightly before running toward the entrance, then suddenly stopped and hurried back. "Do not forget dinner tonight," she reminded him. "Walter said he might have something special." Daniel smiled. "I would not miss it." After watching her disappear inside, he continued toward Walter's diner. The little restaurant had served homemade meals for nearly 40 years, but empty storefronts now surrounded it like missing teeth. Construction signs advertised exciting new investment opportunities, while longtime businesses quietly disappeared one after another. Walter Green stood behind the counter wiping clean coffee mugs that no customers had used all morning. His smile faded slightly when Daniel walked in. "I wish I had better news," Walter admitted. "The lunch crowd keeps getting smaller. I can only give you 4 hours today." Daniel nodded without complaint. 4 hours is still work. Walter leaned against the counter and lowered his voice. "You know, that company buying everything around here made another offer yesterday. They want this building too." Daniel looked around the familiar diner. Grace had once laughed in this kitchen while teaching teenagers how to make pie crust from scratch. Lily had celebrated every birthday here. Walter sighed. "They call it progress. I call it forgetting who built the neighborhood." The morning passed in quiet rhythm. Daniel chopped vegetables, stirred soup, greeted regular customers by name, and somehow managed to make every plate leaving the kitchen look like someone had prepared it for family instead of strangers. Just before closing, Walter opened the oven and carefully removed a single chicken pot pie wrapped in foil. He held it for a long moment before placing it into a brown paper bag. "Last one," he said gently. "Made from Grace's recipe. Take it home to Lily." Daniel accepted the bag as though it contained something priceless, because to him it did. Outside the diner, dark clouds slowly gathered above Baltimore while, only a few neighborhoods away, Evelyn Whitmore was discovering that a city she believed she understood had already begun revealing a truth that no financial report had ever measured. By early afternoon, the city had become louder, faster, and strangely colder, even before the first drops of rain arrived. Evelyn walked block after block without the invisible shield that money had quietly provided her for most of her life. The first cafe she entered greeted customers with warm smiles until the cashier noticed her worn coat. Restrooms are for paying customers only, the young employee said without looking directly at her. Evelyn nodded politely and stepped back outside. At another corner, she paused beside a bakery where fresh bread filled the air with memories of childhood Sunday mornings. She asked whether there was any bread left that might otherwise be thrown away at closing time. The woman behind the counter apologized softly, but explained that company policy did not allow it. 10 minutes later, Evelyn watched an employee carry 2 large trash bags toward a dumpster behind the building. She kept walking. Near the waterfront, she found a public bench and sat quietly as office workers hurried through lunch breaks with shopping bags and steaming coffee cups. Conversations floated past her. Stock prices, vacation plans, restaurant reservations. Nobody noticed the woman sitting only a few feet away. She realized something unsettling. People were not intentionally cruel. Most of them simply never slowed down long enough to see someone they believed had nothing to offer them. Across town, Daniel finished cleaning the kitchen at Walter's diner. Walter counted the register twice before slipping several folded bills into an envelope marked payroll. He handed it to Daniel with visible regret. "I wish it could be more." Daniel accepted the envelope without opening it. "You have never been late paying me. That already means more than you know." Walter hesitated before reaching beneath the counter. He handed Daniel a gallon of milk. "Expiration date is tomorrow. I cannot sell it after today." Daniel smiled gratefully. "Lily will think she won the lottery." Walter laughed quietly. "Tell her I expect an honest review with tomorrow's breakfast." Daniel stepped outside carrying the brown paper bag with Grace's pie in one hand and the milk in the other. Dark clouds now covered the afternoon sun. His delivery application sent another notification across his old phone. Account temporarily suspended pending customer dispute. He stared at the message for several seconds before locking the screen again. Complaining would not feed Lily tonight. Finding another way might. Meanwhile, Evelyn wandered into a small community outreach center after noticing a sign promising assistance. The waiting room was crowded with families, elderly couples, and veterans filling out paperwork. A volunteer greeted her kindly and asked for identification, proof of residence, and several forms she no longer carried. Evelyn explained that she had none of those things with her. The volunteer looked genuinely sorry. "I wish I could help, but the system will not let me process anything without documentation." There was no anger in the woman's voice, only resignation. Evelyn thanked her anyway. As she stepped back outside, she wondered how many people had reached this same doorway believing they were one conversation away from hope, only to discover that even kindness sometimes needed paperwork. The afternoon faded into evening. A cold wind swept through the harbor streets as the first steady rain finally began falling. Evelyn pulled her coat tighter around herself and reached instinctively into her pocket for the emergency phone Marissa had insisted she carry. Her fingers found only fabric. She searched every pocket again. Nothing. She stopped beneath a traffic light and slowly emptied her small canvas bag. A folded map, a handkerchief, a bottle of water nearly empty. The emergency phone was gone. Somewhere during the long walk it had slipped away unnoticed. She considered asking a passerby to borrow a phone, but watched 3 different people hurry around her before she could even speak. Pride mixed with uncertainty. She kept walking instead. A sudden gust of wind pushed rain across the sidewalk just as Daniel crossed the intersection on his way home from Lily's school. She ran beside him holding the paper bag containing the pie while he carried the milk carefully beneath his jacket. "Do you think it will rain all night?" Lily asked. "Probably," Daniel answered with a smile. "That just means we get to hear it on the windows while we eat dinner." Lily grinned. "Mom always said rain makes pie taste better." Daniel looked toward the darkening sky and quietly answered, "Your mom was right about a lot of things." They turned the next corner just as Evelyn stepped off the curb without noticing a bicycle approaching through the rain. Daniel reacted instinctively, reaching forward to guide her gently back onto the sidewalk before she lost her balance. In the movement, the gallon of milk slipped from beneath his arm, fell onto the wet pavement, and burst open, sending a white stream across the concrete before disappearing into a storm drain. Lily looked at the spilled milk, then at the paper bag still safely resting in her arms. She said nothing. Daniel glanced at the ruined gallon for only a moment before turning back toward the frightened stranger. "Are you all right?" he asked. Evelyn looked at the spreading puddle. then into the tired eyes of the man whose only concern was whether she had been hurt. Daniel waited until Evelyn answered with a small nod before allowing himself to relax. "Good," he said quietly. "The milk can be replaced. You cannot." Evelyn looked down at the white stream disappearing into the storm drain. She knew the milk probably could not be replaced, at least not by the man standing beside her. Yet there was no frustration in his voice, no complaint, no sign meant to make her feel guilty. Lily carefully hugged the paper bag a little tighter and smiled at the woman. "We still save the pie," she said as though that solved everything. Daniel laughed softly. "Looks like we did." Rain continued falling harder, tapping against the metal roof of the abandoned bus shelter nearby. Daniel motioned toward it. "Come on. At least stay dry for a few minutes." Evelyn hesitated before following them beneath the shelter. The wind slipped through the open sides, carrying the chill with it. Daniel placed the paper bag on the bench between them and slowly unwrapped the warm foil. The familiar smell filled the small shelter, rich with butter, herbs, and memories that could never be written into any recipe. Evelyn noticed the care with which he unfolded every corner of the foil, as though he feared damaging something far more valuable than dinner. Daniel broke the pie into 3 pieces with the plastic fork Walter had tucked inside the bag. He placed the largest portion into Lily's hands without hesitation. The next piece he quietly offered to Evelyn. The smallest remained for himself. Evelyn stared at it. "No," she whispered. "I cannot take your dinner." Daniel looked at her with calm eyes. "You are already hungry. So are we. The only difference is that now none of us has to be hungry alone." She hesitated one last time before accepting the warm piece. Her hands trembled slightly, not only from the cold, but from something she had not expected to feel. Embarrassment, gratitude, shame. She could not separate them anymore. For several quiet moments, only the sound of rain filled the shelter while the 3 of them ate in silence. Lily glanced toward her father and noticed he had taken only a few small bites. Without saying anything, she carefully scooped part of her filling onto his piece when she thought he was not looking. Daniel pretended not to notice because pretending allowed Lily to believe she had been clever. Evelyn watched the exchange without interrupting it. She had attended charity galas worth millions of dollars where speeches about generosity lasted longer than the simple act she had just witnessed. "My name is Claire," she finally said, choosing the middle name she had prepared before leaving home that morning. Daniel nodded politely. "I am Daniel. This is my daughter Lily." Lily smiled. "Nice to meet you." Evelyn asked quietly, "Do you always help strangers?" Daniel leaned back against the bench and looked out toward the rain. "Not always. Sometimes people just want to be left alone. But everyone deserves to be asked if they are all right." Evelyn lowered her eyes to the pie resting in her hands. "You do not know anything about me." Daniel smiled gently. "That is true. I do know you looked cold." The simplicity of the answer settled over her more heavily than any speech could have. After another moment she asked, "What is this pie called?" Daniel looked down at it for a second before answering. "My wife created the recipe years ago. Lily still calls it Mom's Sunday pie." Lily brightened immediately. "Mom said food remembers people if you make it with love." Daniel chuckled softly. She believed recipes carried stories. Evelyn took another bite more slowly this time. It tasted nothing like the expensive meals prepared by award-winning chefs at corporate banquets. It tasted like patience, family, and ordinary evenings that money could never recreate once they were gone. "Your wife must have been an amazing cook," Evelyn said. Daniel nodded. "She was. Better than I will ever be." He paused before adding with a quiet smile, "This was actually the last recipe she ever taught at Walter's diner before she became sick." Evelyn stopped eating. She looked down at the remaining piece in her hand as the faded words inside the foil echoed in her mind once again. "Grace's Sunday pie. For the days we need to remember home." A heavy silence settled over the shelter. Daniel was not simply sharing dinner. He had unknowingly handed a stranger one of the last living pieces of his family's history. Evelyn felt tears gathering unexpectedly, but she blinked them away before either Daniel or Lily could notice. After a long pause, she asked softly, "If someone handed you enough money tomorrow to solve every problem you have, what would you do first?" Daniel did not answer immediately. He looked toward the rain-covered street where Walter's diner stood several blocks away beyond rows of dark storefronts. "Most people would expect me to say I would buy a bigger apartment," he finally replied, "or pay every bill. He smiled faintly and shook his head. I would help Walter keep his diner open. That place fed a lot of families before it ever fed mine. If it disappears, the neighborhood loses more than a restaurant. Evelyn looked at him in disbelief. He had every reason to think about himself first, yet his first instinct reached outward instead of inward. In boardrooms, she had spent years listening to people explain how human nature always chose self-interest. Sitting beneath a leaking bus shelter beside a tired father with almost nothing left, she realized that perhaps the wealthiest people she had ever known were simply the poorest judges of the human heart. The rain showed no sign of stopping. Water flowed along the curbs in narrow streams while the streetlights painted long golden reflections across the wet pavement. Daniel looked toward the dark sky and then back at Evelyn. "Do you have somewhere to go tonight?" he asked. Evelyn hesitated just long enough to answer honestly without revealing who she really was. "Not anymore." Daniel nodded slowly. There was no curiosity in his expression, only quiet concern. "You should not stay out here in this weather." He glanced at Lily before continuing. "There is a small laundry room on the first floor of our apartment building. It stays warm because of the dryers. You can sit there until the rain lets up." Evelyn blinked in surprise. "You would do that for someone you met less than an hour ago." Daniel smiled gently. "I am offering you a dry place to sit, not the keys to my apartment. Grace used to say kindness works best when it travels with common sense." Lily giggled. Mom had a rule for everything. The three of them began walking through the rain. Daniel carried the empty paper bag while Lily skipped carefully around puddles, occasionally looking back to make sure Evelyn was still following. The apartment building stood only a few blocks away. Time had left its mark on the brick walls and chipped paint, but someone had planted flowers beside the entrance despite the cracked concrete. Daniel unlocked the front door and led them into the narrow hallway where warm air drifted from the laundry room at the end of the corridor. The room was small, with 4 aging washing machines humming steadily against one wall. Plastic chairs lined the opposite side beside a folding table covered with neatly stacked magazines that were several years old. Daniel motioned toward one of the chairs. "You can stay here as long as you need. The manager usually locks the room around 10. Evelyn sat down slowly, grateful for the warmth spreading through her cold hands. Before she could thank him, footsteps echoed through the hallway. Vanessa Reed, the building manager, rounded the corner carrying a clipboard. She stopped when she noticed Evelyn. Her expression tightened immediately. "Daniel," she said carefully. "Who is she?" "Her name is Claire," Daniel answered calmly. "She got caught in the storm. I thought she could warm up for a while." Vanessa sighed. She looked tired rather than unkind. "You know the building policy. Residents are responsible for visitors." Daniel nodded. "I know." Vanessa lowered her voice. "You are already behind on your rent. I cannot keep overlooking every little thing forever." Daniel accepted the reminder without arguing. "I understand." Evelyn watched the exchange closely. Vanessa was not humiliating him. She sounded like someone trapped between compassion and rules written by people she would probably never meet. After a moment, she quietly said, "1 hour. That is all I can allow." Daniel smiled gratefully. "Thank you." Vanessa nodded once before walking away. When her footsteps faded, Lily reached into her backpack and pulled out the small metal tin she carried everywhere. She climbed onto the chair beside Evelyn and carefully opened the lid. Inside were dozens of tiny folded notes in different colors. "What is that?" Evelyn asked. "Our hope box," Lily answered proudly. "Whenever something good happens, we write it down so we never forget." Daniel chuckled. It was Grace's idea. She believed bad days are loud, but good days whisper. If you do not write them down, you stop hearing them. Lily unfolded one of the oldest notes and smiled as she read it aloud. "Daddy gave his umbrella to an old man and pretended he liked walking in the rain." She opened another. "Mom laughed because Daddy burned the pancakes, but we ate them anyway." Daniel laughed quietly. "You were not supposed to keep that one forever." Lily grinned before unfolding a newer note written in uneven handwriting. "Daddy skipped dinner so I could have seconds." Daniel gently cleared his throat. "I think that is enough reading for tonight." Evelyn looked from the tiny pieces of paper to the man sitting across from her. She suddenly understood that the kindness she had witnessed beneath the bus shelter had not been a single extraordinary moment. It was simply another page in a life built from hundreds of ordinary sacrifices that no newspaper would ever print. Lily carefully folded the notes again before slipping them back into the tin. As she reached into her backpack to put it away, a white envelope accidentally slid onto the floor. Daniel immediately bent down to pick it up, but Evelyn had already noticed the bold company logo printed across the top. Whitmore Urban Residential Services. Beneath it, in unmistakable black letters, were the words "Final Notice Before Eviction." Daniel quietly slipped the envelope back into the backpack before Lily could see it. He forced a small smile and changed the subject. "It is getting late. Lily, why do not you see if the vending machine still has hot chocolate?" Lily happily ran toward the hallway with a few coins. As soon as she disappeared, Daniel looked toward the closed laundry room door and released a slow breath he had been holding for far too long. Evelyn stared at the familiar company logo still burned into her memory. She had approved the acquisition of that housing division months earlier without reading the names hidden inside the reports. For the first time since beginning her experiment, she was no longer looking at anonymous numbers on a spreadsheet. She was looking at the quiet cost of a decision that had carried her own signature. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The soft hum of the dryers filled the laundry room while rain tapped steadily against the basement windows. Daniel noticed Evelyn staring at the envelope before quietly placing it deeper inside Lily's backpack. "She does not know everything yet," he said with a tired smile. "Children deserve a few more peaceful nights whenever we can give them one." Evelyn lowered her eyes. "How long have you known?" Daniel leaned back in the plastic chair and folded his hands together. "About 6 weeks." He said it with the same calm voice he had used when sharing his dinner, as though worry had become something he carried so often that it no longer sounded dramatic. "I have been trying to pick up more hours. Walter gives me everything he can, but business has slowed down. I keep thinking I am one good week away from catching up." He glanced toward the hallway where Lily had disappeared. One good week keeps becoming another difficult month. Evelyn wanted to tell him that none of this should have happened. She wanted to explain that the company responsible belonged to her, that the signature approving the housing division had been her own. Instead, she remained silent because every truthful sentence was chained to a much larger lie. "Have you ever thought about leaving?" she asked carefully. Daniel smiled without bitterness. "Leaving is easy if you have somewhere to go." He looked around the small laundry room. "Most of the families here have grandparents nearby, children in the same schools, neighbors who watch each other's kids after work. You cannot pack all that into moving boxes." He paused before adding quietly, "People think a neighborhood is made of buildings. It is really made of promises." Upstairs, the front entrance opened and closed several times as residents hurried inside from the storm. Vanessa's voice drifted faintly through the hallway as she reminded someone to wipe their shoes before climbing the stairs. Life continued exactly as it always had, ordinary and unnoticed. Several miles away, inside the headquarters of Whitmore Urban Holdings, Marissa Cole stood in Evelyn's empty office watching the blinking location screen on her tablet. The tracking signal sewn into Evelyn's code had disappeared nearly 2 hours earlier. She immediately called Richard Hale. "We have lost contact with her," she said. Richard looked up from a stack of project files, his expression tightening. "Did she abandon the experiment?" "No." The signal simply stopped. Richard closed the folder in front of him. "Organize a search immediately." Quietly. "No media, no police reports unless absolutely necessary." Marissa nodded, but before ending the call she added, she planned to spend the day inside the Harbor East redevelopment area. Richard remained silent for a moment. His eyes slowly drifted toward the project map hanging on his office wall. "Then start there." He ended the call, but something about his expression had changed. He no longer looked concerned only for Evelyn's safety. He looked worried about what she might have seen. Back inside the apartment building, Lily returned carrying 3 paper cups of hot chocolate from the old vending machine. "It actually worked," she announced proudly. "That machine likes you," Daniel said with a laugh. Lily handed 1 cup to Evelyn. "It is not fancy, but it is warm." Evelyn wrapped both hands around the paper cup, feeling the heat spread through her fingers. She had attended charity banquets where imported chocolate was poured into crystal glasses beneath sparkling chandeliers. Somehow this simple vending machine drink felt more generous because she knew exactly what it had cost the little girl offering it. Lily climbed into the chair beside her father and rested her head against his shoulder. "Daddy," she asked softly. "Yes. If we have to move someday, will Mom still know where to find us?" Daniel froze for just a heartbeat before placing his arm gently around her shoulders. Your mom does not need an address. He smiled down at her. She follows wherever love lives. Lily seemed satisfied by the answer and quietly sipped her drink. Evelyn turned away, pretending to watch the rain so neither of them would see the tears gathering in her eyes. At that exact moment, headlights swept across the basement windows. One black sport utility vehicle slowed in front of the building, followed by another. Their engines idled quietly outside. Vanessa looked through the front door with a puzzled expression before opening it. Men wearing dark rain jackets stepped onto the sidewalk, speaking into small radios while scanning the building numbers. Marissa climbed out of the lead vehicle, relief washing across her face the moment she recognized the gray coat through the basement window. She hurried toward the entrance. Richard Hale stepped out of the second vehicle a few seconds later, adjusting his overcoat as he followed. Daniel heard unfamiliar voices echoing down the hallway. Lily looked up curiously. Evelyn slowly closed her eyes because she already knew the ordinary evening that had begun with one shared meal was about to change forever. The basement hallway grew strangely quiet as the footsteps approached. Marissa reached the laundry room first, breathing hard from rushing through the storm. The instant she saw Evelyn sitting beside Daniel and Lily, relief flooded her face. "Thank goodness," she whispered before she could stop herself. "We have been looking everywhere for you, Ms. Whitmore." The words seemed to suspend time itself. Daniel did not react immediately. He simply looked from Marissa to Evelyn, waiting for someone to explain why a frightened woman called Claire had suddenly become someone whose arrival required a convoy of black sport utility vehicles. Lily frowned in confusion. "Daddy," she asked softly, "did she say Miss Whitmore?" Evelyn slowly stood, every movement feeling heavier than the last. She looked directly at Daniel, unable to hide behind silence any longer. "My name is not Claire," she said quietly. "It is Evelyn Whitmore." The room remained still except for the steady rhythm of rain outside. Daniel's expression did not change into anger all at once. Instead, disappointment settled across his face with the quiet weight of someone realizing that a conversation he believed had been honest was built on something incomplete. Lily looked at Evelyn and then at her father. "She owns the company on the letter?" she whispered. Daniel lowered his eyes for only a second before answering truthfully. "I think she does." Richard Hale entered the laundry room with practiced composure, brushing rainwater from his coat. The moment he recognized Daniel, his attention shifted to the eviction notice still partially visible inside Lily's backpack. He recovered quickly, offering the polished smile that had carried him through countless investor meetings. "Ms. Whitmore, everyone has been worried. We should return immediately. The board is waiting." Evelyn did not move. Richard continued speaking, now turning toward Daniel with the smooth confidence of a man accustomed to solving problems with money. "Sir, I appreciate your assistance this evening. Whitmore Urban Holdings would be happy to compensate you for your kindness. We can also arrange a media feature highlighting your generosity. I believe the public would find your story very inspiring." Daniel looked at him for several long seconds before speaking. "My daughter is not a story." Richard's smile weakened slightly. "Of course. I simply meant that positive examples deserve recognition." Daniel gently took Lily's hand. "Recognition is not what she needs. Neither are cameras." Evelyn watched every word land. Harder than any accusation could have. Daniel turned toward her, his voice remaining calm despite the hurt behind it. "Did you know who we were before tonight?" "No." Evelyn answered immediately. "I swear I did not. I never knew your name. I never knew this building was part of the project until I saw the notice in Lily's backpack." Daniel searched her face, looking for something beyond the answer itself. "But you did know you were pretending to be someone else?" Evelyn nodded. "Yes. Then every conversation we had belonged to two different people." The sentence was quiet, yet it carried more pain than anger. Lily slowly reached into her backpack and removed the small metal hope box. She held it against her chest without opening it. "Were you pretending when you ate Mom's pie?" she asked. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "No, that was the truest moment I have had in years." Richard stepped forward again, sensing the conversation slipping beyond his control. "Ms. Whitmore, this is exactly why we should leave. We can address any housing concerns through the proper corporate channels tomorrow." Evelyn finally turned toward him. "Corporate channels created those concerns." Richard hesitated. "The redevelopment plan follows every legal requirement. Legal is not the same as right. Evelyn replied quietly. The words surprised even her because she realized she believed them completely. Vanessa had quietly gathered several residents in the hallway, each of them watching the exchange with cautious curiosity. Evelyn looked at the familiar faces surrounding her. She no longer saw anonymous tenants. She saw neighbors whose lives had been reduced to spreadsheets she had signed without asking enough questions. She faced Daniel again. I cannot erase tonight. I cannot ask you to trust me because trust cannot be requested. It has to be earned. Daniel remained silent. Tomorrow morning, Evelyn continued. The redevelopment agreement will not be signed. Every eviction connected to that project will be paused until I personally review every file. Not because you helped me, because I finally understand what those files actually contain. Richard stared at her in disbelief. Do you realize what delaying this project will cost? Evelyn met his eyes without hesitation. I am beginning to understand what moving forward would cost. Daniel listened carefully before answering. If you really want to thank me, do not save my apartment because you feel guilty. Fix the system that put every family in this building one letter away from losing their home. Evelyn nodded slowly. That is exactly where I intend to begin. Daniel looked at Lily, then back at Evelyn. Words are easy. My daughter has already seen enough promises disappear. Evelyn accepted the truth of that without defending herself. She reached into her coat pocket and removed the faded foil wrapper she had quietly folded after finishing Grace's pie. She held it carefully, reading the handwritten words once more. Grace's Sunday pie. For the days we need to remember home. Looking up, she realized that before this night ended, she had been given something no board vote, no acquisition, and no fortune had ever been able to buy. The chance to remember what home was supposed to mean. 6 months later, the rain returned to Baltimore, but it no longer felt like the same storm. Fresh flowers lined the sidewalks outside the apartment building where faded concrete had once been the only welcome residents received. The broken entrance lights had been replaced. New windows reflected the harbor skyline without erasing the families who had built their lives there. Most importantly, every resident had signed updated housing agreements guaranteeing long-term stability before a single renovation began. No one had been forced to leave in order to make room for someone wealthier. The redevelopment project still moved forward, but now it moved around the people instead of through them. Newspapers praised Whitmore Urban Holdings for an unexpected change in direction, yet Evelyn refused every interview that attempted to turn one evening into a publicity campaign. Whenever reporters asked what inspired the decision, she answered with the same sentence. Communities are not investments waiting to happen. They are promises waiting to be kept. She never mentioned Daniel by name. She believed some acts of kindness deserved protection instead of publicity. Richard Hale no longer oversaw redevelopment projects. An independent review uncovered years of reports that measured financial gains while minimizing the human cost of displacement. He quietly stepped away from the company as new leadership adopted policies requiring community representatives to participate in every major neighborhood decision before final approval. It was slower. It was more complicated. It was also far more honest. Walter's Diner opened its doors again on the first Saturday of spring. The old neon sign had been repaired, but everything else remained wonderfully familiar. The wooden booths still carried tiny scratches from decades of conversations. The coffee still smelled exactly the same. A new sign hung beside the entrance instead of expensive promotional banners. It simply read, "Everyone eats together." The diner had become both a neighborhood restaurant and a community kitchen where no family was ever turned away because of a difficult month. Daniel never accepted a gift disguised as charity. When Evelyn approached him with financial assistance, he politely refused. Instead, they spent weeks creating something different. Whitmore Urban Holdings invested in restoring Walter's Diner as a partnership owned by Walter, Daniel, and a neighborhood cooperative. Daniel became head chef and operations partner because of his experience, his work, and his vision, not because anyone felt sorry for him. His first decision surprised everyone. Every Sunday, the restaurant served Grace's pie exactly as she had taught it years before, and one slice from every batch was placed aside for anyone who arrived hungry without enough money to order. No questions were asked. No forms were completed. Lily loved that tradition most of all. She still carried the small metal hope box everywhere she went, although it had become almost too full to close. On the afternoon of the grand reopening, she unfolded one of the oldest notes. Daddy gave his umbrella to an old man and pretended he liked walking in the rain. She smiled before adding a brand new piece of paper in careful handwriting. We learned that home gets bigger every time someone is welcome to the table. Daniel watched her slip the note inside and smiled quietly. Your mom would have liked that one. Lily looked up. I think she already does. A familiar car pulled gently into the parking lot, though there were no cameras, no security team, and no reporters waiting outside. Evelyn stepped inside carrying nothing except a simple covered pie dish wrapped carefully in a kitchen towel. She laughed softly as soon as Daniel noticed it. I tried making Grace's recipe, she admitted. I still need a great deal of practice. Walter accepted the dish with a grin. Around here we judge pies by the heart that made them before we judge the crust. Everyone laughed together. During lunch, the diner filled with construction workers, teachers, retirees, young families, and longtime neighbors sharing tables with complete strangers. No reserved section existed for executives. Evelyn stood beside the serving counter pouring coffee whenever someone needed a refill. Nobody treated her like the most powerful person in the room because she no longer acted as though she was. When the afternoon crowd finally thinned, Daniel carried the last fresh pie from the kitchen and placed it carefully in the center of the table where Lily and Evelyn were waiting. He cut it into 3 equal slices. This time no one secretly accepted the smallest piece. This time no one had to pretend they were not hungry. As they ate, Lily looked toward Evelyn with the thoughtful curiosity only children seemed able to keep. Can I ask you something? Evelyn smiled. Of course. When we met, were you poor? Evelyn rested her fork on the plate before answering. I had more money than I could ever spend, she said honestly. But I had forgotten what enough really meant. That made me poorer than I realized. Lily considered the answer for a moment before nodding. I think you are doing better now. Daniel laughed softly. That is one of the highest compliments she gives. Warm sunlight drifted through the front windows as neighbors continued talking around them. The laughter inside the diner mixed with the familiar sound of dishes, coffee cups, and quiet conversations that no spreadsheet could ever calculate. Before leaving, Evelyn noticed the framed sign hanging beside the kitchen door. The faded foil wrapper from Grace's pie had been preserved beneath glass, and beneath it Daniel had placed a single sentence. No one eats alone here. Evelyn stood silently for a moment before turning toward the room that had become fuller than she ever imagined possible. 6 months earlier, one father had shared what he believed would be his last meal with a stranger who seemed to have nothing. He never expected that the smallest piece of pie could become the first course of healing for an entire neighborhood. Sometimes the greatest wealth is not found in what we keep for ourselves, but in the seat we choose to leave open at our table for someone who believes the world has forgotten them.